This is the Weekly Squeeze, and I'm your talented and lovely host, Chanale, coming at you from the beautiful land of Israel, episode 215. I have a great show for you today. The best-selling author of Towards a Meaningful Life is here, Rabbi Jacobson, a.k.a. YouTube's favorite rabbi. So stick around. It's going to be a great show, and you do not want to miss that. Don't forget to subscribe on Apple Podcasts and YouTube and Spotify, wherever you are listening. Rate and review the show. And if you're related to me, and that's about half of you, don't forget to write and review the podcast enthusiastically. Over Shabbat, I read a lot of books about the history of the Palestinian-Israeli dispute. Not because I don't enjoy a good novel, but because I live here and I'm living it. And knowledge is power. And understanding the layers of this conflict it's essential when it affects your day-to-day life. Yet, as I delved deeper into the material, I kept returning to the term dispute and conflict. And the more I thought about it, the more I felt like I wanted to clarify what's actually happening here. This isn't a disagreement between two sides. It's not a conflict. It's not a dispute, but something far more insidious. It's a genocidal war aimed at the Jewish people, waged by a primitive desert clan of Middle Eastern Arabs whose sole purpose is to harass the living falafel balls out of the Jews living here in their ancestral homeland. The Jews who lived here for millennia, over 3,000 years, despite the best efforts of the Babylonians, the Romans, the Greeks, and the Arabs. The Jews who settled and developed this land. The Jews to whom the international community gave political sovereignty of the land. The Israelis who won this land in defensive wars, and the nation who was given this land by the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, as inscribed in the Bible over and over and over again. And while many nations have tried to destroy us, from the Canaanim to the Plishtim, who, by the way, have no connection to the modern-day Palestinian, the ancient Philistines, and all the other ancient tribes, they disappeared into the annals of history, along with all the other Jew haters. What the world calls Palestinian is a modern-day creation, invented by liars, funded by capitalists and corrupt nonprofits, controlled by greed, encouraged by warmongers, and supported by tyrants, despots, and a whole host of cruel, deceitful, and ignorant people around the world who have spent the last 75 years pouring money into Gaza like the Gazans were something special, when they in fact are very much not. The only extraordinary thing about the Gazans is that they are the biggest scammers on earth. You know the gypsies that stand on the corner with their dirty kids begging for money? The ones who pretend they're Jewish and steal from us when they're not collecting money? Well, that's what we're dealing with. They don't have the same morals, ethics, and values as the rest of us. And it's time to wake up. These people are not like us. They are not like us. I'm not saying they're not human. They are. And that's why this is so horrific. Because they're the worst kinds of humans. They're humans who believe that it's their God-given right to decide who dies and who lives and when they're going to die and which one of their kids is going to kill them. It boggles my mind. How does a woman give birth and witness the most extraordinary miracle ever, and then without a bat of an eyelash, teach their child that it's okay to abuse animals and kick dogs and donkeys and chase cats? They certainly don't have a USPCA anywhere in Ramallah, that I could tell you. Kind-hearted Israelis take in their stray dogs all the time. Cats, well, that's a different story. It's too bad Israelis don't have a surplus of Haitians instead of Eritreans. We have a lot of cats. The Gazans, the Palestinians, the Israeli Arabs who engage in jihad against Israel, they don't value human life. They don't value any life. Humans who kill other humans, abuse animals, and perpetuate mass murder using everything at their disposal to accomplish it, they're messed up. That's messed up. It's messed up to hold a precious newborn baby and take a picture of it with a grenade and a Hamas headband because you're praying and hoping one day he'll blow himself up. That is messed up. And I'm not exaggerating. There are women right now in the Middle East who tuck their children into bed at night, and you know what they whisper into their ears? One day soon, Ahmed, you'll be a shaheed for Allah, and we're going to hang your poster all over the city. You're going to be a hero. So what does that kid grow up thinking? In the morning, he or she are off to school, where they're bombarded with anti-Israel propaganda every day, all day, because their schools are run by Hamas. And they're fanatically religious. And Hamas is fanatically religious, and religion is everywhere. There's no freedom of speech in Gaza. there's only religion, and everything goes according to the letter of the law, or else you'll be arrested and dealt with by, guess who? The Hamas-run government system that will deem you guilty without trial and drag your body through the village attached to a motorcycle so everybody sees what happens to someone who uses a rainbow emoji in a text. And in case you're thinking, wow, that sounds really awful, well, it is. Of course it is. You remember Not Without My Daughter, Sally Field? Like that, but 10 times more oppressive and more psychotic and more abusive. Does anyone ask themselves why the international community doesn't ask more of the recipients of all their time and money? Like, for starters, how about some transparency? Do we know what happens to adults who abuse children in Gaza, or do we not care? Has any NGO or journalist ever done any investigative work in Gaza so they can perhaps help the countless children being physically, emotionally, psychologically, and everything else abused in these communities that operate more like cults and Neanderthals than functioning modern-day societies? Why don't people care about the child abuse happening in Gaza? It's fairly simple to get there. Easy enough if you have good intentions, as hundreds of white European NGOs can attest. They sure know how to get there when their goal is to demonize Israel. So how patently pervasive and widespread is this abuse, you ask? Well, let's continue to describe life for little Ahmed or Amir, who live in Gaza land. Everywhere they go, they're fed 2 messages: breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Israel is the source of all their problems, and Arabs are complainers to begin with. And that Jews are not human. We're the sons of apes and pigs and monkeys, and we're all evil, and we have to die. And you, little Ahmed, you must kill them for us, for your great-grandpa. But I don't want to kill. I want to go outside and play with my friends and ride my stolen bike. Well, you have no choice. You're going to pray, and then you're going to practice stabbing Jews on the frozen chicken thawing on the kitchen counter. And after you've done your homework, which includes all kinds of math problems that, of course, include eliminating Jews, you can watch an hour of cartoons, which, of course, involve, you guessed it, propaganda and more brainwashing about how evil the Jews are, how evil your neighbors are, which is so weird because your brother Mohammed, well, he works in Israel, and sometimes when you're talking before bed, he tells you, they're kind of really nice, these Israelis. They're so trusting, and they don't abuse us. October 7th, the terrorists had mats of the kibbutzim because the workers told Hamas everything. They took advantage of the kindness and generosity of the Israelis and used it against them to kill them. So my question is, does anyone care? Does anyone care that little Ahmed, who could be anything any child can be, a doctor, an engineer, a businessman, well, he gets enrolled every summer into camp, where Hamas counselors teach the preteens how to stab human beings so that they kill them every single time, how to sharpen knives and shoot machine guns and RPGs, all the while knocking it into their heads that Jews must die. The Palestinian children are a product of 2 generations of severe mental and psychological abuse. They have raised sons and daughters who take their vehicles and drive over Jewish toddlers waiting at the bus before Shabbat, who will stab random human beings walking down the street, people they have never met before, and stab them so violently and aggressively that they will murder the victim almost every time before they're stopped. These kids turn into young men who see no issue in taking an axe to the head of a kind employer who just gave them a ride from work. Men who drive up to cars where 3 lovely blonde women are driving and pulverize their bodies with machine guns. These are not civilized people. They encourage their children to chase women who are jogging in the park and to grab them and beat them to death with a rock. That's what being a shaheed means. It means celebrating that your neighbor drove through Jerusalem with a bomb in his car and blew himself up to pieces just so he can injure and maim and kill random Israeli teenagers waiting to go to school. This is celebrated in Gaza with candy in the streets. The international community and the Red Cross and the progressive idiots of the West who are so open-minded their brains have literally fallen out. They're all choosing to ignore what the issue here really is. It's not political, it's not religious, it's not a class of interest, it's not a conflict. It's child abuse on a massive scale, where young women are married at 14 and the victims of honor killings if they dishonor a father or brother. That is child abuse. And let's not forget the way the women are treated in this community. Misogyny is everywhere. Everything is the woman's fault, and women have no rights, and they have substantially less value than men. It's not a secret. It's a fact. And not only is it being ignored by the West, it's being encouraged. Palestinian children are all the rage. They have social media followings. They're being dragged out of the rubble, and everyone wants to adopt one. What don't you get? This is what happens when a society abuses their children. It's karma. The universe has a very funny way of expelling bad people, of getting rid of bad people from this earth. They self-destruct. And that's what we're seeing here. We're seeing the result of the biggest case of child abuse ever not recorded. And when you raise children to be barbaric savages who murder and plunder and rape and kidnap and mutilate other human beings in the name of God, then you're a child abuser. And your villages and your refugee camps and your cities and your neighborhoods and your towns and your homes should be destroyed. And the only one to blame are the Gazans themselves. They had every opportunity to get themselves out of this self-made mess. Israel offered them olive branch after olive branch after olive branch. We sent in all the doves and pigeons. We put on suits and we made deals and we shook hands and we gave land and money and resources. So many resources that they managed to build the largest underground terror tunnel system on earth. Where right now there are innocent men, women, and children being held in tunnels in squalor. And the world puts the onus on Israel? Why? Because the anti-Semite doesn't believe we stole from him. He just enjoys watching us turn out our pockets. Israel must stop apologizing. The only ones to blame are the Gazans themselves. There is no excuse. Teaching your children to murder other people is pure evil. And evil doesn't last, it implodes. The Gazans are getting their just desserts. Child abusers do not deserve freedom or support or protests or fundraisers, or any positive attention at all. They must be destroyed. The only thing we can do for them is pray for their souls. Pray that they give us back our hostages. Pray that they put down their weapons. Pray that they repent from their evil ways. Pray that they accept help and resources to start again. But they need to heal from within. You can take a donkey to the water, but you can't force him to drink. So now to get to my interview with Rabbi Jacobson, I have to say, considering the challenging times that we are in, I yearn for a day when we had strong leadership and guidance, as we did with the Lubavitcher Rebbe. So I invited Rabbi Jacobson to join me on the show today to discuss the Rebbe's opinions and directives on the topic of safety and security here in the land of Israel. So without further ado, Rabbi Simon Jacobson. This week's episode of The Weekly Squeeze has been brought to you by Queen Tulsi. We're all feeling the weight of the stress these days, but did you know there's an all-natural supplement that can help you feel calmer, less moody, and more relaxed? Meet Queen Tulsi, a powerful blend created by a mom who was tired of feeling overwhelmed and didn't want to turn to pharmaceuticals. With the help of an herbal chemist, she created a unique formula combining Tulsi and ashwagandha, providing natural stress relief, lifting brain fog, and balancing inflammation in the body. Unlike mass-marketed supplements that lose potency on the shelf, Queen Tulsi is made in small batches using only the freshest herbs so you feel the calming effects quickly. Plus, it's certified OU kosher, vegan, non-GMO, and free from anything artificial. Listeners of the Weekly Squeeze podcast can use Queen Chanale for 15% off, including subscriptions at CarolineBassHealth.com. Experience the natural calm Queen Tulsi brings into your life. Helene Singer shares that Queen Tulsi helped her son in college manage test anxiety, so he's taking a year's supply abroad. Kathleen Paris says it's a lifesaver, helping her manage stress and creating a soothing evening ritual. Queen Tulsi, create your calm naturally. Visit www.carolinebasshealth.com. Queen Tulsi, create your calm naturally. Visit www.carolinebasshealth.com and start your journey today. Rabbi Jacobson is a Chabad chassid of the Lubavitcher Rebbe who grew up in Crown Heights during the heyday of Lubavitch, witnessing firsthand the monumental accomplishments of the Rebbe during his 40-plus years of leadership. As a young bacher, Rabbi Jacobson dedicated himself to transcribing and studying the vast teachings and Hasidic insights of the Rebbe, a passion he continues to pursue today, exploring the deep well of wisdom found in the writings of the Rebbe and his predecessors. You might know him best as the author of the best-selling book Towards a Meaningful Life, a transformative work that has touched the lives of countless individuals, selling over 400,000 copies and translated into numerous languages worldwide. If you don't own it yet, don't worry. We have a link in the show notes. You can grab a copy and extra points if you send one to Candace Owens. Rabbi Jacobson is not just an author, but a speaker, educator, and mentor to thousands. He heads the Meaningful Life Center, which serves as a bridge between the secular and spiritual, making the timeless wisdom of Torah accessible to people from all walks of life. With his deep understanding of human nature, Rabbi Jacobson provides clear guidance and support, especially during tough times through various live and online programs. Rabbi Jacobson is also a sensation on YouTube with over 200,000 subscribers and more than 15 million views. I need some tips before you leave, making him YouTube's rabbi of choice. Rabbi Simon Jacobson, welcome to the Weekly Squeeze. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for your kind words.
My pleasure. All right, let's get into it. So we are currently in the midst of an existential war here in Israel. My neighbor's sons are enlisted. Nebuch, we lost 2 sweet boys already on our block. The citizens of Israel are stretched thin, physically, emotionally, financially. The threat from the Arab nations at our borders and across the Middle East have manifested into serious attacks, as we experienced April 16th, obviously October 7th. Everywhere you turn, people are misplaced, distraught, exhausted, in mourning as the war stretches on and on. As Hezbollah rockets continue to pour in from the north, as our hostages wither away and die in Gaza, and life in Eretz Israel continues to demand an endless amount of Jewish blood in exchange for peace. I'd like to go through some of the main threats we're facing as a nation now, and bring the Rebbe's perspective and advice into each of these issues, how the Rebbe addressed each of these serious issues. So let's start from the top. Civilian safety and security. So sadly, rockets and terrorist attacks are nothing new for this country, and I, as a millennial, remember the Intifada clearly. Let's start from the basics. What directives did the Rebbe have regarding Israel's borders, territories, and necessary security measures that were clearly not heeded and brought us to where we are today?
So first of all, before I answer your specific question, which I will do, I want to just share something on a personal level. Since you listed all the horrible events and the feelings and experiences, I just want to say, though I'm thousands of miles away from Israel, but like all Jews, my heart and soul is with you and with all the people there. We are one organism and one body, and when one part of the body is hurting, all of us are hurting, and we all cry together, and we're all in the war together as well. And that also comes from the Rebbe, the idea that we are part of this. Even if you're not in the military, nevertheless, you're part of the spiritual war, the psychological war, the emotional war. So I wanted to just say that at the outset. I want to also say this. The Rebbe's primary approach to all of this, and we'll get to the specific question you're asking, is based on 2 things. Based on Torah, wisdom, thousands of years of wisdom and experience of the Jewish people who have gone through so many terrible massacres and genocides and expulsions. And secondly, on simply the understanding of human nature and history. And people misunderstand that. They think sometimes that the Rebbe is speaking just as a rabbi, esoteric ideas from archaic sources. They're actually extremely cutting edge and practical, while also being grounded in the profundity of Torah thinking. So with that said, let me respond to your question. The number one cardinal cornerstone of everything in Judaism, in Torah, and in life, frankly, is the preservation of life. In Hebrew, we call it pikuach nefesh. Once someone is in danger, it changes the whole equation. Even the very laws of Torah are abrogated on Yom Kippur. If somebody's in danger and there's nothing else they can do, they're actually supposed to eat pork on Yom Kippur, if that's the only way that will save their life. Because number one is v'chai bahem, the Torah says, live. Don't die by the Torah, live with it. With that in mind, when you mentioned the enemies surrounding Israel, declared war on Israel, back in 1948, probably even earlier. But let's start with that. And they've never stopped that declaration of war. I'm not talking about the countries that signed the peace treaty, the Abraham Accords, and so on. But countries. Hamas calls for the destruction of Israel in its very constitution, as does Iran. So when you have a sworn enemy, you don't even need to look at the Torah. But the Torah, obviously, in its wisdom, tells you you have an enemy. This is not a neutral situation. And therefore, you have to be vigilant and number one, protect your innocent civilians, which means it's not about being hawkish or being extremist. It's simply what everyone would do. How do I protect my family? How do I protect my home?
Common sense.
The only way is number one, having strong borders, strong military, strong deterrence, and not allowing the enemy to attack, as long as they're a sworn enemy. So, with that attitude in mind, you negotiate only through strength. You don't show any weakness or concessions because that's exactly what the enemy wants. So, with that, that defines a strategy. It defines how to approach things. October 7th, we don't want to point fingers right now, but would it have happened if Israel was vigilant and knew that any second Hamas could and will attack them? There was some type, they let their guard down. You don't really know what happened. But the Rebbe's attitude back from 1967 and going back to 1948 was always, you'd have a sworn enemy and you have to treat it as such. Don't ever become complacent and allow yourself to be lulled into an illusion that everything is nice and good. You need to be strong. And therefore, the Rebbe said, you cannot negotiate by giving land for peace when you're dealing with an enemy.
Right. The Rebbe issued decades of warnings about Israel's dangerous policies. He always believed that it would lead to terrorism and more bloodshed, to the extent that some people were not surprised by the recent tragic events.
Yeah. I mean, I think the best example that is simply a historical example. Imagine at the end of World War II, right? The Nazis are being destroyed. The Japanese are being destroyed by the Allies. And then somebody in the American government or some of the allies say, you know what? Maybe we've heard them enough. Let's give them the keys to Berlin. It doesn't work that way. The only way in war with an enemy that has created so much destruction and has attacked you is absolute total victory, unconditional surrender, and the winner dictates the terms. I'll be very frank with you. Whenever I hear the word ceasefire, I literally about to throw up. It's like a hoax. What do you mean ceasefire? You know how you achieve ceasefire? Hamas surrenders. It returns all the hostages. It changes its constitution, calling for the destruction of Israel and the Jews. That's how you have a ceasefire. It's all about consent, as if there are two sides here. One side attacked the other in the most atrocious and brutal way. And then there's the call for ceasefire. Someone's shooting, God forbid, at your house, at my house. And then they say, hey, before you return fire, let's have a ceasefire. The whole thing has been turned into a very false narrative. And that is simply a distortion. But it goes back to the same thing. Protect your citizens. That's the most important thing.
Yeah. The day they lay down their arms, then there'll be a cease of firing from their side to us.
Exactly right. Yep, you got it.
All right, let's talk about the hostage crisis. Without a doubt, the most challenging issue that Israel faces at the moment. We know the value that the Torah puts on human life, as well as the conundrum Israel is in as they debate the cost of pidyon shavuim in the future. We know that soldiers were captured in the Yom Kippur War for a prisoner exchange, and there was one soldier, Ron Arad, who was captured in Lebanon in 1986. But I don't know any other occasions in modern history where Jews ended up in such an unfortunate situation. Maybe in KGB Russia when the kids were kidnapped into the army. Did the Rebbeim speak about hostages? What do you think the Rebbe's advice would be in this case?
Yeah, 1979, actually. And I could give you the date if you like, because I obviously study this and look it up. It's this Motzei Shabbos Parsha Bamidbar, in case anyone's interested. 1979, the Rebbe spoke explicitly about this. As you just said and alluded to, Pidyon Shvoyim, which means the release of captives, of hostages, is unfortunately an historical reality where people kidnapped someone or kidnapped some people and wanted a ransom or some other demands. And it's called in the Talmud a mitzvah rabbah, a great mitzvah. One of the greatest mitzvahs is to free hostages. They're asking for $1 million. They're asking for $500,000. However, there's a big condition. What happens that if you pay a very high ransom and that incentivizes the enemy? This is actually a question in halacha, in Jewish law. What do you do then? Then you free the hostage, but you've also incentivized the enemy And they'll now take more people hostage. And that has been a fact also in history. And the Rebbe addressed that directly with Israel. One of the reasons Israel always had a policy, and I think the United States may also have this policy, not to negotiate with terrorists, is precisely for that reason. Because yes, you may save one person, but in turn jeopardize 1,000 other people. So we all, and this is where the conundrum comes into place. Our heart goes out. If it's my child, it's my friend's child, my neighbor's child, even a stranger's child, if you can free that child, of course you do anything possible. But then you have to think of the bigger picture. It's a time of war. You don't want anyone to be a sacrificial lamb, obviously. But this is the big conundrum. I don't envy anyone that has to make this decision, because it's like you don't want to give up any life and for anyone. But at the end of the day, we all know what Hamas did. They did it very deliberately. I mean, they used their own civilians as shields, let alone Israeli civilians. And that's what they did. If you kidnap an 18-month-old child, the Biba's children, 4-year-old child, I mean, you're capable of anything. Of course, we want them freed, and we hope they're safe. But what do you do that may incentivize? That's where you have a real big dilemma. I don't have a black and white answer. The Rebbe didn't answer clearly, say specifically. He just said you have to take into account that it's not just the hostages. If it was just hostages, obviously you do everything to free them. The problem is there are other implications here. And therefore, it's a complex issue. That's what we have to say. But it cannot just be resolved one way or the other. I think I've spoken to Biba's family and others. Many say, no, we don't believe that you should just do anything. Like stop the war and let Hamas free to free the hostages. Many of them don't feel that way at all, even though it's their own family. So I think you just have to take all these, nuances into account when you look at it. And I don't think there's a black and white answer. It's
and
case by case.
And hope that the soldiers find our hostages and there's no cost
Exactly
to bring
right.
them home.
Exactly right. But let's be honest, I'm sure they've just killed those 6 in cold blood, and who knows what else they will do. It's horrible. How can I say it's horrible? But let us say, for example, the Nazis at the end of World War II, I go back to my analogy, would say, we will release 1,000 Jews from concentration camps if you stop this war. You know, what do? Of course you want those 1,000 Jews, but you have another, who knows how many other Jews in the concentration camps, and can you let the Nazis remain in power for that? Is that the proper trade-off?
I think the 8 says not to get into the situation to begin with, unfortunately.
From your mouth to God's ears.
Yeah. General McCall from America, he was in Israel recently, and he said, I came away from the trip satisfied that the IDF's operations and rules of engagement were rigorous compared to the British Army and our Western allies. The Rebbe knew a lot about, on the topic of warfare and the military. He impressed the highest-ranking generals, and he didn't shy away from advising them on military strategy. Is there anything the IDF has done until now, and we've made mistakes, and we're always eager to share them with the world, which is another conversation. Do you think that the Rebbe wouldn't be pleased with some of the tactics of the IDF, or do you believe destroying Hamas is, it's a biblical commandment, and we must adhere to it no matter the human cost? I'm speaking about the Palestinians specifically.
Yeah, I wouldn't use the word biblical commandment. I'll tell you what I would say is the following. And I'm now quoting or paraphrasing the Rebbe to some extent. The Rebbe always made it very clear. When it comes to war, just like when it comes to medicine, you don't speak to administrators and to politicians. You speak to doctors. When it comes to war, you have to speak to military strategists. If you allow diplomacy and political pressure and political considerations into play, you're playing with lives. So I think the Rebbe would say, and I think most of us, until anyone with a little clear-headed person would understand, what should dictate what's going on should be completely military. The fact that the United States or Europe or anti-Semites here or there are trying to pressure Israel, or Hamas's massive PR and propaganda campaign, as we all know is very much part of this war, that should not be a consideration. One consideration only. How do you destroy the enemy? How do you free the hostages? And how do you make sure this never happens again? And more importantly, how do you transform that whole area? So I don't really know all the military considerations. I'm sure there are many things we're not aware of. But it does seem to me that there were times during this last year where certain ceasefires or certain pauses were made and certain considerations because of American pressure. They say the entry into Rafah, into Rafia, was somewhat limited, but maybe it wasn't. I think it seems to me that basically the Rebbe's advice would be is stick to your military strategy. Yes, we're not looking to offend anyone, but you can't allow outside factors to compromise your own soldiers. You're sending them into dangerous territory.
Right, and it only stretches out the war longer and causes more death, ultimately.
Correct.
When they hesitate and when they postpone. Right, not everybody cares, right? Not everybody cares. Ironically...
And Israel has to care,
Israel cares more than anyone else. So that's why I've always been confident in the IDF, because I know their intentions. And that's what this whole court case, this international court case is about. The intent of genocide. There is no intent of genocide. The intent is to bring the hostages home and get rid of Hamas. And that's it. And that's what they're doing.
The international court, frankly, and the UN are one big farce. It's just part of the battle of trying to weaken Israel's resolve by, absolutely.
Let's continue on that topic of international pressure and diplomacy. So the Rebbe is known, obviously, for his extensive outreach, his engagement with politicians and diplomats and leaders in the faith community. He advocated for Jewish interests and broader humanitarian concerns. But he didn't shy away from being critical. He called out the Soviet Union during the Cold War era. He was critical of Egypt. He was not happy with various international figures and countries that were hostile towards Israel. What did the Rebbe feel ultimately about balancing our military objectives with global expectations and maintaining that support from key allies like America?
So a few points. Number one, peace for peace, not land for peace. I have no doubt that the Rebbe would have supported and celebrated the Abraham Accords. Why? Because, as the Rebbe said many times, cultural exchange, business interaction. What happened with the Emirates, with Dubai, with Bahrain, a peace that can only benefit both sides without any concessions that jeopardize you. There's no pikuach nefesh compromise there. So the Rebbe would encourage exactly that, diplomatic terms with Saudi Arabia, with all the countries, and that's the key. Peace for peace, that everybody's giving something, but it's not jeopardizing Israel.
Well, we saw on April 16th how all the countries surrounding Israel, they helped shoot missiles down from Iran because of that peace that we have in place and that we worked on.
Yes, and it would be far greater. And exactly, by the way, Hamas attacked exactly that. They understood what's happening because they didn't want Saudi Arabia to sign a peace accord. And they disrupted the whole process. But just imagine all the Arab Muslim countries signed peace treaties with Israel, just like the Abraham Accords. And that's that. Israel's not looking to hurt anyone. It would be peace not just for Israel, it would be peace also for what is called the Palestinians. That's the tragedy here. So that's point number one. Point number two is the Rebbe was not a warrior. He wasn't calling for war. He was responding to an enemy who's calling for war. And you have to sometimes preempt the enemy. Never did the Rebbe say, go on the offense and go to war. The Rebbe said, protect yourself, be strong, and always remember that strength is critical, especially in that region. It's the only thing that people respond to. So this was not a contradiction at all, the balance. Remember, in Judaism and Torah, the greatest thing is peace, is living in harmony with everyone and everyone. The Rebbe many times said, this will be peace and harmony for the Jews and for the Arabs. We abhor the shedding of blood of anyone. But to do so, you have to be strong. You can't be weak. You can't appease an enemy. Iran is calling for the destruction of Israel. They're building nuclear weapons. Let's be honest. That is a real threat. It's not a joke. And that has to be addressed. As long as you don't address that, you got yourself a very serious problem. So at the same time, by all means, you want peace, let's talk. Like what happened till now. As I said, the Abraham Accords. And that the big change there was they did not tie the peace treaty with the Palestinians and a two-state solution and so on. And you build from that strength.
The Palestinians are not peace partners. You can't work with them, so.
Right.
let's talk about the humanitarian crisis, because that is a big issue for this war. Ultimately, obviously, Hamas designed it this way, that the children in Gaza should be the ultimate victims here. And I speak about the child abuse that's taking place in Gaza in the monologue of this episode. But we do have a humanitarian crisis. But let's say until a child shoots his first gun or plants his first pigua, let's say he's innocent, okay? So as a humanitarian, the Rebbe, what did the Rebbe hold was the appropriate approach to preventing unnecessary loss of life? Like Israel's doing the polio vaccines and roof knocking and pachkevilim. Is this because we're a nation that has mercy? Is this our nature? Or are we basically making it easier for our enemy? We're making it as easy as possible for them to survive this war.
Look, it says that Jews are Baishanim, Rachmanim, Goim Lechasadim. It's just the nature of the Jew to be compassionate. And nobody is happy to see little children dying, innocent people dying. I'm not getting now who's innocent, who's not innocent. You have to remember these children, unfortunately, are victims of Hamas. Long before October 7th. They're holding them hostage. But we still have compassion for them. And that's why you see going beyond the letter of the law, of warning, of trying humanitarian efforts. It's a complicated one, again, because of the war situation. You know, the Talmud says an interesting thing. When the Egyptians, and we all know the Egyptians were like Nazis, when the Egyptians were drowning in the Red Sea, the Reed Sea, after 210 years of punishing and torturing and enslaving the Jewish people, they were drowning. The angels began to sing praise to God, saying, "Thank you, God, you're finally destroying the enemy." And God's response is, "My creatures are drowning and you're singing praise." Now, of course, they deserve to die. But you have to be careful in singing praise. Of course, we want the enemies to die, but we cry for the fact that even any human being created in the divine image can stoop to the level of behavior that they did, the atrocities. So our blood boils, but you know, the Jewish people never allow ourselves to become like our enemies. We're not going to be defined by them. We're never going to become haters like they are. So we have to do everything possible to protect ourselves. And hence you have this paradox, this what do you do? This issue that on one hand, we must protect ourselves and we can't have compassion for the cruel. As they say, compassion for the cruel, you end up being cruel to the compassionate. At the same time, we have in our hearts that sensitivity that we cherish life. And life is sacred. Even the life of our enemy is sacred.
Yeah. It's nuance, and that's why Israel spent so much time.
Look, we need to understand, as the Jewish people, we are comfortable with paradoxes. We've dealt with it all our lives, all our history. You know, thank God we have many blessings today. But I am not going to sit here and say to you that it's easy solutions. I don't really know. It's a hard one. Because you can't stop the war. You know, you can't not attack your enemy. If your enemy has placed themselves in a hospital, in a kindergarten, around children, and that's the only way to get to the enemy, what do you do? And you know clearly that there's going to be 1,000 children that may be killed because within those children in that kindergarten, there are 5 terrorists that are brutal, bloodthirsty murderers. That's a real question. What do you do when you're a compassionate person? I'd like to ask anyone in this world what they would do if it was their family.
Well, Israel's held fire many times before. Israel holds fire all the time. You know, even after a lot of time and money is invested into an operation, they will hold their fire if they feel that it's not worth the cost of life.
Yeah. So I think the Rebbe would say to that, a situation like that, you have to ask the military strategists. I don't think he would just say, kill 1,000 children because you're killing 5 terrorists, because it's not our language. We don't speak that way. But if military requirements are such that you're going to have to save lives, and they are doing that. I mean, the Germans did that. 100 million Germans. I'm not going to say they were all Nazis. They were being held hostage by the Nazis. Many of them were complicit in their silence. But the fact of the matter is that's what the problem with in time of war. Innocent people are going to die. And it's extremely disturbing. War is bloody. I mean, there's no other way to say it.
Yeah. Well, there's no denying that this war has intensified the tensions in Israel deepening divisions between different communities and political factions, the Rebbe placed a strong emphasis on Ahavas Yisrael. So what do you think the Rebbe would advise to restore national unity and overcome this internal strife? You're like, I don't know. Nobody knows. Even Shlomo HaMelech doesn't know. How can we build bridges during this time of heightened tension in Israeli society?
Well, you mentioned Shlomo HaMelech. We know the classic Shlomo HaMelech story that the real mother would never allow the child to be cut in half. Unfortunately, one of the most important things in Ahavas Yisrael, besides the mitzvah and the beauty of loving your own family and being one, is that it's the child. We don't cut a child in half. Even if you disagree with someone, it's a time of war. It's a time of unity. I spent time with some of the soldiers down south near Gaza. And these are like tzaddikim. These are the purest souls, 20-year-olds, 21-year-olds, ready to give their life and giving their lives to save Jews. So to me, it's so repulsive to see our own family quarreling. We have disagreements, but there's a time for everything. Right now, people are bleeding. You can't, if my family got into a fight while my father's lying in a hospital bed bleeding to death, something wrong. So I would criticize myself or anyone that gets into any type of the political disagreements, the ideological disagreements. So I cannot fathom how we could become so divided when right now there are people in danger, literally in danger, hostages, and of course the soldiers. So that's my initial emotional reaction. On a more intellectual level, what do? I don't know. I mean,
you send the Bachram out to put tefillin on.
Well, what I always tell my Haredish friends, I say, if every religious Jew in Israel invited their secular neighbor to Shabbos, the landscape would change. Because let's be honest, it takes two to tango, two to battle, and maybe the religious can be even more responsible in some ways. We have to see ourselves as one family. The Rebbe's emphasis was all Jews are one. Doesn't matter who you are, doesn't matter anything. We're all one people. We may have very strong disagreements, but especially in a time of war, that's when you need unity more. And we all know when Jews are united, nothing can hurt us. When we're divided, unfortunately, we become very vulnerable.
Yeah, listen, we remember the Yom Kippur before the war. My brother-in-law was a chazan in Tel Aviv, and people were throwing siddurim at the people davening. And we thought, Rahman al-Islam, how did we get here? But unfortunately, we're in a very desperate situation, and tensions are high, and tempers are flared.
Being in the month of El, I have to also say, we see also tremendous nobility and tzedakah and chesed being done. I know we're speaking all the negative side. I think we should acknowledge that 100%. There's tremendous amount of money that has been given and aid and support. So there are challenges, but there are also a lot of beauty that has arisen where you see how Jews have united in many ways. A lot more to be done, but we cannot deny and ignore the positives as well.
And also, if you're watching from afar, you think Israelis are at each other's throats. But when you live here, most Israelis just go about their day trying to have peace with their neighbors and extending additional love during these times. And I don't see that the behavior on the streets is indicative of what people feel about their fellow Israelis. I think that it's a Motzei Shabbos thing to come out on the streets and vent your frustrations. Really, they should be davening to Hashem and extending their calls for freeing the hostages to the Eibishter. But on a day-to-day basis, Israelis have really come a long way in figuring out how to communicate, because there are a lot of different opinions, as you can imagine. But they're trying for peace, at least within us.
Yeah, I've been to. I know what you're saying. Absolutely. Unfortunately, in the political realm, that's where the worst is. Because it's political, who's in control, who wants to be in control. And people are, unfortunately, they're exploiting the situation, I think, in a really horrible way. And there's times like this, you have to keep your quarrels private. You don't want your enemy exploiting it. And
Listen, we're victims of psychological warfare on top of everything else. We're human beings, and we get very affected by what we see and what we feel. And we react right into our enemy's hands. So we have to be 2 steps ahead of them and know already that this is their intention, and avoid being susceptible to it time and time again.
I should add, I mean, maybe you're going to get to it, but the big elephant in the room is ultimately Iran. These are all proxies. They need funding. They need support. Iran seems to be the ultimate, the final frontier. It's interesting how Israel is going to deal with that. With
You
here, the
spoke
Rebbe would
about
say
Iran on
absolutely.
YouTube. Yeah, you spoke about Iran on YouTube and what the prophecies predict. Can you share that a little bit on that?
Yeah, well, I was going to say that then, but I'll say it now. You know, with all the negative, we have to remember Am Yisrael Chai. We're here. We've gone through the worst of the worst. I don't want to compare tragedies, obviously, but we've made it. I like to say Jewish people are like a tea bag. You don't know how strong they are until you put them into hot water. So we are here. We've survived the Egyptians and the Babylonians and the Assyrians and the Romans and the Spanish and the Ottoman. I mean, the list goes on. So I am not really concerned. I'm concerned, obviously, for every individual, but the bigger picture, we're here. And when we turn to the prophecies, especially, it talks about end of days where there'll be confrontations. We call it clash of civilizations, confrontations, especially in the words of the biblical worlds of the children of Yishmael, which is essentially today's Muslim Arab world, the children of Esav, which is essentially the Christian Western world, Roman world, and the children of Israel, the children of Yitzchak and Yaakov. And it talks about confrontations in the Zohar, in the Medrash. The Rebbe cited in 1990 during the Persian Gulf War, the 1991, Saddam Hussein, that there will be one Arab nation will attack another, the world will be frightened, what will happen, and the Jews will run around confused, and then God will say, don't be afraid, my children, I'm doing it all for you, because the bottom line is that he gives mangul aschem, the time of your redemption has arrived. In other words, pre-redemption, the world of total peace, there will be confrontations in a way like so-called a reality check, lack of a better word, a clarity. So this doesn't in any way minimize the pain and the agony and the tragedy, but at least it gives context. It gives a context and it gives strength to know that with faith and trust in God and holding strong to our moral values and our beliefs, we will prevail, while at the same time fighting the right war that we need to fight, not minimizing that at all. So it's a matter of also, as you mentioned, psychological warfare, which is psychological strength. You know, you could be superior in your military and in your ammunition and in all your resources, but if you don't have the confidence, you usually lose wars. And that's critical as well, that the Jewish people, including the IDF, have that deep faith and connection that gives us strength, like the Hasidic statement, you're bound above, you don't fall below. Which means when you hold on to your faith and strong beliefs, that gives you the strength to get through all difficulties. So it's not just physical weapons, it's also spiritual weapons. And that's all part of this battle and this war.
And Amanetzach lo mefached miderech haruka. So it's a long path, and it's going to take time, and it's arduous and painful, but eventually there's light at the end of the tunnel.
Well, absolutely. Like someone told me recently, they suffered a personal tragedy. They said, at the end, all will be good. If it's not good, it means it's not the end yet. So the story isn't over.
All's well that ends well. How should we respond to the increase in fear and uncertainty among Jews in Chutz La'aretz to come to Eretz Yisrael? I'm in an intel group, and somebody posted, I'm coming for Yom Tif, my wife is terrified. I said, the Rebbe said, Hashem protects Eretz Yisrael all night and day, never closes his eyes. It's the safest place on earth. Let's remind people that Eretz Yisrael is Taka, the safest place on earth, in case you didn't notice that there are Hamas flags in Times Square, New York.
Exactly right. And the Rebbe said it time and again when he was asked by people who wanted to travel to Israel, were afraid. He said, it's the safest place on earth. I even recently saw, like maybe one of the last, when the Rebbe had a stroke in 1992, someone asked him a few weeks earlier, does he still stand by his position that Israel is the safest place. There were some threats then. I don't remember exactly what happened. And the Rebbe said, absolutely, it's a posuk, a verse in the Torah, Eretz asher einei Hashem elekecha ba mereshis hashana v'ad achris shana. God's providence, his eyes are on this land all year round. And that never changes. Torah nitzchis, it's eternal Torah. The Rebbe made it very clear. And exactly as you said, today you look at the campuses, look at other places. I mean, there's danger everywhere if you want to find danger. On the other hand, look at the miracles in Israel. I mean, despite all that, I was in Israel, I was amazed. You walk in Jerusalem, and if you wouldn't know the news, you wouldn't even know there's a war. Because there's a certain amount of resilience, and I guess Israel's also hardened its shell, now, at the same time, you have to fight the war. So no one's taking away from the challenges, but there's also an inner strength, which is called betochen. To be honest, betochen. Does not minimize the strength of trust and faith in God, because even with all the success in life, if you don't have that, we're always vulnerable. We're mortals. We are fragile. Anything can happen to anyone. You have to have something deeper that you hold on to that gives you ultimate security. And that's what the Rebbe was saying, and that's what we have to dig deeper to find those resources.
I was saying, though, and Bechlal, the reason the Rebbe gave so much attention to Eretz Yisrael, even though he never visited himself, was because the Rebbe felt wherever there is a large gathering of Yidden, that's a place to invest in Shluchim and in the Yiddishkeit. And I don't think the Rebbe ever once discouraged somebody from coming to yeshiva here or coming to seminary here. The Rebbe felt very strongly that the Yidden should be in Eretz Yisrael.
Absolutely, and I've no question that would be the case right now. And thank God, the population in Israel has grown and will continue to grow. We will get through this, and we'll be stronger than ever. The pasuk in the Torah that says, "Kashiyano esam ken yerbe v'chen yifretz." The more the Jews were afflicted, the more they thrived and they flourished and they blossomed.
All right, one more thing on a positive note before you leave. The Rebbe spoke a lot about tzedakah, obviously, and how the mitzvah of tzedakah brought protection to Eretz Yisrael. So can you just encourage people to go to the show notes and donate to all our charities, because obviously tzedakah tatzil mimaves. But when it comes to increasing in learning and mitzvahs for Eretz Yisrael, what do you suggest for our listeners who want to do something special for Eretz Yisrael specifically?
I'll quote, first of all, the Torah and quote the Rebbe. There are particular mitzvahs, as you mentioned, tzedakah, and we'll talk about that in a moment some more, that actually have a quality that opens up the doors of blessings, and especially protection in times of danger. Tzedakah, tatzil mamavis, as you said, charity. You know, when you want Hashem's charity, Hashem to be kind to us, we have to be kind to each other. And monetary charity is where it begins. It's one of the greatest and considered the greatest mitzvah in so many ways, because besides the unity it creates, it also helps people. So I definitely second what you just said, to go to the notes. Is it below the screen here?
Yes, in the show notes of the podcast, yeah. And help the chayalim.
Absolutely,
and
show
we
notes
have
of
all kinds of
podcasts.
funds.
Obviously, any tzedakah works. We're also in the month of Elul, where we especially add an increase in charity and tzedakah. It opens up the channels of blessings. Siyam b'mishpat tepada v'shaver b'tzedakah. You talk about captives. That's what the verse says, that Zion will be redeemed through mishpat Torah, and v'shaver, its captives and hostages, b'tzedakah, with charity. So this charity is up there. Mezuzah is a mitzvah that has the quality of protection. There is for men, putting on tefillin drives fear in the heart of the enemy. And of course, many other mitzvahs, Avos Yisrael, Achdus Yisrael, we spoke about unity. These are some of the mitzvahs that really create more strength and more power. And there's no question, every war has a physical side and a spiritual side. The spiritual side is when you do tzedakah wherever you are in the world, you are strengthening directly Israel, its people, the soldiers, the release of the hostages. It's a direct effect. And if you want some scientific basis for that, we know the butterfly effect. A butterfly flaps its wing in one part of the world and it can create a typhoon in another part of the world. The same thing on a positive note, one good action, one good word, one good thought. Maimonides, Rambam writes, tips the scales and brings personal and global redemption.
Amazing. All right, before I let you go, just a little more inspiration. Have you by any chance heard from Mashiach lately? Is he coming? When is he coming? What's the latest news on Mashiach's arrival?
You know the expression, they say, those that know don't say, and those that say don't know. If I heard from Mashiach, I don't know if I would be able to say.
I always say I'm going to announce it on this podcast as soon as I know. You have to listen. You have to make sure you're subscribed.
I'll tell you a story then, if I may. My father, as you know, was Gershon Jacobson, was the editor and publisher of the Allgemeine Journal. Your grandfather was one of the founders.
And my grandmother's poems used to be written. Baba Sarah Shimanovich, exactly. Her poems were on the back page.
Exactly. My father, one Simchas Torah, the Rebbe said to him that the Alter Rebbe, the founder of Chabad, said that when Mashiach comes, it will be in the Gazetten. It will be in the newspapers. So the Rebbe told my father, so you should be zeicher to write it in your newspaper. The headline, Mashiach came. One sec. So my father says to the Rebbe, can I get a scoop? Be the first one to publish it. So the Rebbe smiled and said, as soon as I know, I'll let you know. So I always feel that being my father's son, that I'll be one of the first to know. And I will promise you now that you'll be one of the first to know, and you'll publish it in your podcast.
Excellent.
And the Gazetten, what today includes a digital version, that Mashiach has come. What can I say? The Rebbe told us that we're on the verge, we're on the threshold. And one more thing we need to do. We have to forge ahead. I have many questions, I'm sure, like others do. But we've been trained to be soldiers. We have to forge ahead. There's no time for doubts or questions and skepticism. We keep marching ahead. We do what we have to do, and I'm confident that we will see Mashiach in our times.
Amen. Excellent. I want to thank Rabbi Simon Jacobson for joining us today and sharing his incredible insights. Your wisdom and guidance is truly appreciated. It was an honor to have you on the show. For those of you who want to dive deeper into Rabbi Jacobson's teachings, be sure to check out his book, Towards a Meaningful Life, and explore the amazing work he's doing at the Meaningful Life Center. We've included links in the show notes. Rabbi Jacobson, thank you very much. Hope to see you here soon. With Mashiach, of course.
Thank you. I want to wish you and all your listeners a good gebench year.
Same to you.
And in the real way, with total peace and the geula.
Yeah. Am Yisrael Chai. Thank you very much. Thank
you.
So there you have it, episode 215. Don't forget to subscribe on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify. Order Clean Tulsi. The link is in my show notes. And donate to an IDF barbecue so we can continue to boost the morale of our amazing soldiers. Stay safe wherever you are, and I will see you